Hey everyone, this is Herbalo, and for this video, we're going to talk about another lesson. And this time, we're going to proceed with the other layer na nasa baba ng domain layer, no? Which is the data layer. And specifically for this video, we're going to discuss the following. Of course, the role ng data layer sa clean architecture and the components within this layer sa data layer, and how do we implement this in Flutter. Now, for this video, just to inform you ahead, this is going to be a lengthy video if I'm going to include everything on how to implement this layer, kasi there's a lot of things that we're going to work out in this layer, no? So for this video, we'll just focus on later na lang I'll show you specifically ano yung mga classes that we're going to develop. But yeah, we're not going to develop all components. We're not going to implement them all in this video, but yung mga ano lang, kumbaga, I'll just cut this lesson into many parts, no? But anyway, let's proceed with our first topic, which is about the data layer, no? What is the role of data layer? So simple lang, no? You just take note of these three verbs, no? First is the data layer fetches data from a data source, the actual data source. Could be a remote server, API, or a local storage. And then once makuha na niya, yung na-fetch na data is going to process that retrieved data and sends it to the domain layer. Because the domain layer is the one that's asking the request. Could be create, read, update, or delete na request. And the data layer is going to fulfill that and it's going to send those request responses back to the domain layer. And another thing, aside from fetching data, the data layer also manages the storage of the fetched data in the local database. So there are instances where the app needs to not only retrieve lang niya, sometimes there are features in the application na kailangan gumana kahit naka-offline siya. So in order for those features to work, which definitely kailangan niyang mag-display ng data, so he needs to get data from a local database. So of course, but before that, before it gets something, we have to store first. And usually that happens right after when the application or the data layer has retrieved or fetched data. If the data needs to be stored for offline use, so yun din yung gagawin din ni data layer. Okay, so that's about it, no? Dalawa lang yung main role ni data layer: for the fetching of data, process, and then send it back to the domain layer. And if some of those data requires to be accessed offline, so the data layer is also going to store those in the local database. And now, this is the zoom view of the data layer. Specifically, ano yung mga components, no? So, already done with the domain layer. Now, sa data layer, same pa rin with the domain layer. We have the repository. At this time, implementation na siya. Unlike the domain layer, where it's just a list of abstract na mga methods, wala pa siyang specific implementation na how each CRUD function will behave or work, no? Diyan natin yan itatakle or handle. All the instructions or all the implementations will be in this component. And then, kung sa domain layer, we have the entities. Yung counterpart niya sa data layer is the model. So, ganun pa rin. Same pa rin yung how the entities work in domains. But the difference is model has some extra methods that you're going to see after in a short while. But the next one is the data source. So the data source is literally it's the source of the data. If the repository is going to request something, say get all the items, the data source is the one that's going to fulfill that. And the data source is going to communicate with the local storage and remote API. So whatever source siya kuan, is either remote or local yung source ng data niya. Okay, now let's talk about first the repositories. Implementation. Implementation. So yeah, it's the concrete implementation of the repository interfaces defined in the domain layer, as I mentioned a while ago. And then it also handles the data retrieval, storage, and conversion between domain entities and data models. Yan lang. Basically all the nasa repository. And then for the models represent the raw data from the external source. When we say raw data, this could be JSON, JSON, na type na raw of data. And it's used to transfer data between the data layer and other layers. Yeah, I suppose that. No? Then data source is the one that interacts with the actual data source. So the actual data source, it could be a remote API, pwede din local database like SQLite if you're familiar with it, or Hive. Yun yung common na ginagamit sa with the local data storage, or shared preferences, pwede. Then in the data source, as I mentioned, it could be it's either remote or local yung data source. So when the repository is going to communicate with the data source, pwedeng either remote or local. Most often remote talaga yan, no? Kasi this is where most of the data comes from, sa server, no? Which we can only access it remotely. It's either remote and sometimes local. Pasalin yung local. If some data needs to be stored locally, so the repository needs to also communicate with the local data source, the objects, the dependency. And yeah, so that's much about it. And now I'm going to show you how I'm going to create. Actually, yung gano lang natin, focus lang natin is the data source and the model, and some other classes that we're going to use in our later videos. But anyway, I'm going to proceed with our program right here. Now, as you can notice, this is the features natin. I only included expense feature lang, so expense tracker, and then as usual we have the domain, data, and presentation. We're already done with this layer, so we're going to create some folders just like what we did with the domain. No? So again, 3 yung components dito, so we're going to create 3 folders. So the first is data source, then just right click, then new folder, and then models. And then new folder for the repositories, repository implementation, and then, or just ano na lang natin, repository IMPL for implementation. Masyado kasi mataas, mahaba na yung words, no? So yeah, then since expense man to, and then for the models, Now, yung kailangan na natin is we're going to develop these three: data source, the model, and repository, but not everything. And we're going to start with the model. So since expense man to, and na kung ano yung models dito, so I have two right here for the expense. I have the expense summary and expense, this one equatable. And let's say for example, I'm going to create the expense na model. So dapat dito sa model, just right click this one, new file, and then it should be expense model dot start. Boom. Yan. And then I'm gonna create class expense model, and since as I mentioned, yung model is pretty much the same as an entity, but it has a few extra methods. So therefore, we could say that the expense model is just an extension of already existing entity na expense. So we're going to extend lang the expense class natin. And yun. Make sure you hit enter para mag-automatic siyang mag-import. And of course, a zero constructor. Yeah, we're going to develop this. No? And wait lang. No? Now I'm not going to finish this kasi I just remembered I have a ChatGPT na prompt dito. Let me just look it up somewhere. I think I have it right here. Yan, okay. So, rather than this is just a hack, no? Para di na tayo matagalan pag-develop. What we're going to do is go back to your entities. In this case, I have the expense na entity. And just simply copy-paste everything right here. Pag mo lang isali yung line 1, yung imports, copy everything, Control-C, o right-click, copy, basta copy nyo yan. And then, you're going to enter this command. So, I'm just going to zoom lang this no, para makita nyo. But, what you're going to do is, this is the prompt, create a clean architecture data layer model class by extending this entity class. Include the methods from map, from JSON to map, and to JSON. So, ito yung sinasabi ko na mga extra methods that we're going to include for this class. We have the from map, from JSON, to map, and to JSON. So, we're going to discuss that each of these. But, once you have this, ito, don't change anything, don't include any text, whatever. Once you have this prompt, this exact prompt, then you copy-paste yung entity that you want na we're going to ask ChatGPT to create class 4, no? So, yan, expense, equatable, so on and so forth, and it's going to generate this one. This very long, kaya nga sinabi ko na we're going to use ChatGPT para hindi tayo matagalan. Just click this, and then of course we just go back to our code and then paste it, and boom, we're done. Not exactly that, no, because we're going to edit some of these codes right here. Actually mag-error to kasi not error, more of recommendation. Kasi use super parameters instead. So we just click this quick fix and then convert to using super parameters para mas short yung code natin. And yan. This is much more cleaner para sa akin. And okay, now we have a couple of two errors dito. And the reason for that is yung JSON is a library that we are going to import, no? So I'll just click this and then quick fix and then import library dart convert, and yun, wala na, nag-error. So yeah, we are finished with our model, no? Sa expense model. And let's have a little detailed overview of each method. The first is from map. And factory siya, by the way, no? So, since this is the factory na method, special method to in Dart language, no? Kumbaga, when you have a factory na method, when we're going to call this one, it's going to create a model. And how is going to create the model, kailangan din niyang, this method should also accept a map na kumbaga string and dynamic. If you're for those who are not familiar what a map is, it's basically a dictionary, no? If you're familiar with it sa ibang languages, kumbaga, this is another data structure where it's composed of key and pair, a key and value. So this is the key, and for each key may value. So, yung data type ng key is string, tapos yung value niya, kaya dynamic kasi for yung mga values natin dito, ID is integer man, amount is double, map at date is date time, and we have string. So, kumbaga, iba-iba yung data types ng mga values natin. So, if pare-parehas lang string yung data types ng mga values, pwede sanang string to. But since iba-iba, int, double, date time, string, and so on and so forth. So, that's why dynamic yung nilagay natin na keyword for the key. Again, this is key and this is value. So, going back, again, ano bang purpose ng gamit ito? It's literally a method that we're going to use to create an expense model. It's going to create a model based on whatever is the key values na nasa stored dito sa map na data structure natin. And yeah, that's it. So you can see naman sa line 16, it's going to return a new expense model. Yan. ID is equals to map. Just try to review na lang the Dart language map ng data structure, how it works. Basta this one, ibig sabihin nito is we're trying to access the value of this ID na key. So, ano yung value ng ID nito? That will be the value of this ID na attribute for the expense model. So, ganun lang. And next, we also have from JSON. This one is also a factory na method, but yung difference lang is instead of basing, magkakreate tayo ng expense model from the map, magkakreate tayo ng model from a string na JSON na string source. No? Most probably and highly na JSON to yung string na to. If you're not familiar with JSON, just search na lang in Google. Ano ba yung structure ng JSON or ano ba example ng JSON. But yeah, basically that's just it. And next we have to map. So this one is the opposite of from map. So kung from map is we're going to create an object from a map, or we're going to create an expense model object from JSON. This time, yung to map is this is a method we're going to use in order to convert the model to a map. So baliktad. So kanina, from map magiging model, from a model, we're going to convert it, or it's going to return its map version of it. Method to convert an expense model to map. Yeah, as simple as that. No? Same also with this one. This is the method to convert the expense model to JSON. So yun, that's pretty much it for this model. And now, we're going to proceed with the other one, which is yung repository implementation. And as I mentioned, this is just implementation ng repository right here, which is this one. No? And what we're going to do is we're going to create, right-click, once again, new file, and expense repository. Repo na lang, repo for short, and then AIMPL for implementation. Dart. Yan. And we're going to type again class expense repository repository implementation. And we're going to use this keyword implements. Then ano yan? Expense repository. This one. And that's it. Now, since mag-error to, because once a certain class is going to implement a interface or abstract class, so we're gonna have to override. We are mandated to override all the listed methods right here. And once we click that, boom, it's going to generate all those methods from here. And this time, as you notice, meron na siyang body. Unlike sa expense repository, that's just basically ano lang, what the function is, ano yung i-return niya, ano yung parameters niya, and yun, period. Semicolon. But eto, now we are mandated to fill up kung ano yung mga instructions that it needs to perform in order to accomplish this method, which is add expense, delete expense, and so on and so forth. And notice, by default, it's going to throw an unimplemented error. No? Kasi, obviously, we can't just call each of these methods without just leaving them blank. Kaya yun yung, for the meantime, temporary lang naman to. We're not going to permanently nga dapat throws an implemented error. Kasi pag tinawag to, it's going to throw an error. And most likely it's going to cause your application to crash. So each of these methods, we're going to implement them. But let's just leave it right there for the next video. Kasi mahaba-haba pa to. But for now, kung ano yung mga repositories nyo, you just name it expense repository, and then you just add this keyword, implementation, and then you use implements. Tapos, you just go lang. Quick fix, and it's going to insert everything right here. So, we're done with the repository implementation. Lastly, the data source. And this is just very easy lang. No? Kasi yung data source is pretty much the same sa expense repository. You just copy this. And we're going to type expense remote. Now, we'll just for this video, for the meantime, we're going to focus lang muna on the remote data source. But we'll see in the future if we are going to include also the local data source. But anyway, sorry. Small letters pala. Expense remote data source dart. And we just simply copy paste everything. Now, that's not what we're going to change this now, obviously. Abstract expense remote data source. Yan. Okay. Sige. Pwedeng data source. Ayan, yan na lang. Data source. Capital S. And now, here's where dito na magkakaiba na ang data source and the repository. Kasi, the data source is not going to Magbabago yung ano natin dito. No? We're not going to use the either, but we're going to return the exact value talaga na kailangan niyang i-return. No? And what I mean by that is we're going to remove the either. No? So that, remember, if na-recall na yung sa first videos natin, ito yung original natin, di ba? Future void, no? Before we revise it sa the later natin na mga videos, we insert an either. This time, we're going to delete everything. We'll just revert this to our what is supposed to return. No? Let me just run now. Okay. Wait a minute. Oh, sorry. Yun na. And yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. No? Now, meron pa ring errors dito because obviously we haven't imported them. So, just a quick fix lang. You just click fixed. Or if you're using a keyboard, yung shortcut niya is Control period until we are able to import everything. And that's it. Now, if you're wondering, bakit abstract class yung data source natin? It's because we want the repository to depend on a interface. Kasi in the malay natin, no, how are we going to implement the data source is going to change from time to time. Pwedeng yung data source natin, yung remote data source natin, posibleng API, posibleng tawag ito, MySQL na database, pwedeng MongoDB database, which is a NoSQL. So, we want to be able to flexibly change, no, our data source without just modifying our code, right? Without tampering our code. So that's why abstract class ito siya. And in the later parts of the video, which is we're not going to cover it kasi mahaba-haba din ito. We're going to create a class that's going to implement or simply a concrete class of this expansion remote data source. But for now, this is just simply a list of crude functions na abstract methods lang. And yeah, that would be all for this. Oh, sorry, meron pa pala. Almost forgot. Yeah. I forgot pala yung exceptions, no. Ito na-include ko na to kanina. But let's just lang. Basically, itong remote data source, since it's not going to return the failure, but it will return exactly kung anong value niya na i-return, void, list, expense summary, so on and so forth. But what's going to happen is, obviously, there's a chance that when we're going to call the crude methods sa remote data source, it's going to fail. So if this one fails, instead of returning a failure class, it's going to trigger a exception. Pag sinabi exception, is just an event that's going to disrupt your flow of your program unless you handle it. So that's why iba-iba kasi yung mga yung mga exceptions that could happen. Pwedeng um, an unfortunate event that's caused by the server to fail or from the local storage. So just like what we did with the failures, we have three failures, or actually ano, what we're going to create is dalawa lang, no? Dalawa lang para anyway, where are we? Ano na lang, tatlo pala, sorry. My bad. So I've already created the first one, which is the API exception implements exception. So exception is an abstract interface. So hindi extends but it implements, no? And then just like what we did with the failures, yung corresponding failure niya, so we will include the attributes na message and status code, and we're going to create yung corresponding constructor niya. Sa API exception pa lang to, no? So we're also going to create the other two. Sorry, two pala, no? So this one is not API exception but siguro cache. Yeah, cache exception. Kasi cache failure, whatever is the failures mo dito, daron then right here, no? And of course, wala namang status code yung cache exception. So let's just leave it with a message lang. Oh yeah, error to kasi dapat parehas to. And then lastly, now kaya I'm a bit hesitant with this, but let's just try lang for the meantime. It's just general exception lang. Exception is best, no? Class exception. Wait lang, ha? Yeah. So reason to use instance of this class in test. Yeah, I'm just double checking if an exception is okay. Creating instances of exception directly is discouraged. Yun. So therefore, we will need to create our own exception talaga. So yeah. And that's it. So these are the customized exceptions that we're going to trigger once my encounter na error or failure yung each of these CRUD methods. And since remote data source man to, most of the time we're going to use yung API exception. And let's just leave this exception for now. We might be able to use this in the future, but ito yung gagamitin natin most of the time for remote data source related na mga errors. So yeah, that's pretty much about it, no? And that would be all. And in the next video, we're going to tackle how we're going to, diba, we just left this one blank, no? So in the next video, we're going to focus on this, the repository implementation, how we're going to, or what exactly yung mga instructions that we're going to include for each of these CRUD methods. And yeah, that would be all for this video, and hope to see you guys in the next lesson. And yeah, goodbye.